what modeling does do for us is it gives us the trends and kind of the trajectories of where the river is going as a result of this sediment moving and of floods, big events. It's the best we can do with the tools that are available. That's the bottom line. And then what we have to do is we take the hydraulic modeling, and if any good practitioner understands a model is only as good as the model, you have to take practical experience and understanding of river processes and how rivers behave, and you put the two together to come up with your final answer, so to speak. And that's where the experience comes in, obviously, into a pretty big play, understanding what and how rivers behave. So this is getting back to kind of some bigger questions. And remember that very first photo that I showed you? I said, keep this in mind just as we start to talk about sediment hydraulic modeling. Because this is a very important issue here that I'm trying to demonstrate. One of the things that I showed you in that very first photo when it showed all the way up to Shady Cove is that you saw a very big floodplain up here above Little Butte and on up to Shady Cove. And you can see here the valley in the reservoir area, it's really, really wide. And what happens is it necks down. You can see these two hills here. It really necks down. So this is really wide, necks down, and then it stays neck down once it goes into the canyon, what we call the canyon reach. Once it gets in there, it stays very narrow. And in fact, it stays very narrow. And if you floated the river and been on the river very long, it stays very narrow until you get downstream of Grants Pass, down to where the Applegate comes in. There's some bigger pools, a lot of gravel that deposits out in the Applegate confluence. It's great salmon fishing. I caught a 30-pounder there last summer. Nice big snook. And so the Applegate is where a lot of this material is able to deposit. But again, it's only temporary. And then based on the modeling that was done at Savage Rapids Dam, the modeling that was done at Gold Hill Dam, that material continues to go out down through the wild and scenic to the ocean, basically. It continues that far. And so one of the big issues is, where is this sediment going to end up? The answer to that is eventually it's going to end up in the ocean, in a long ways downstream. Again, looking at the geologic controls here, this is another important picture to show you. In, this is Greg, I think this was your house that we were talking about here at the Red Roof. This here, you're looking upstream of the dam, obviously, and you're looking down the canyon, there's the Red Roof, and then this is a picture showing down here. One of the things that you can see is that you've got a very hydraulically efficient channel. It's got a lot of bedrock. Why isn't there a lot of gravel in here and in this area? And why isn't there a bunch of sand or smaller rocks or sediment stored in here? Because you've got a very high energy, what we call a transport area. Rocks, sediment is not stored there, it's transported beyond there. You'll find it in little gravel bars here and there where the river widens a little bit and you've got some kind of big obstruction, but for the most part, it transports right on through this reach. If you look at the hydraulic modeling, you can start to see why it transports through this reach. You can see here where the Gold Ray Dam is, and this is based on modeling if the dam were out. So the dam is gone. This is what the modeling looks like. This is velocity. This here is 10 feet per second under a 100-year event, like a 100-year flood. You can see in the reservoir area, this area upstream of the dam, the velocities are all below 10 feet per second. Once you get past that constriction there, where the dam used to be, look at the velocities. They go way up here to 10, all the way up to 16 feet per second. So the reality is velocity and shear stress, or the ability of a stream to move sediment, like big gravels, is directly correlated to the velocity. So as you see, if anything gets through this reservoir area, it's going beyond this area here as well. Okay, because the velocities, shear stresses, stream power, everything is significantly higher once it gets past where Gold Ray Dam is, or used to be if you're looking at the model after the dam is out. So there's been a lot of different studies on this type of what happens if you yank a dam out. What happens to all that sediment? Well, here's an experiment that was done by Jan Tao Sui and a bunch of others over the years that have looked at this very scenario. And there was an experiment, and then this is a computer simulation of the experiment. what happens is you have this wedge of sediment. This would be like all the sediment stored behind the Gold Ray Dam. This sediment, after you pull the dam, starts to disperse out. And what happens is it meters out, and then eventually it completely disappears, or it gets transported out of and downstream. And so it's like this big pulse of sediment that starts to take off more and more, and it distributes out. It doesn't move as one big wedge of sediment. It goes to a lower energy level, starts to distribute out. So that's where I was trying to focus with this picture here, is showing you this kind of tan color here. It's all very low, flat. I mean, you know from living here that this is a big, kind of like a floodplain area with no real relief out here as far as topographic relief. Then you've got Table Rock, obviously, that jumps out at you. But then you've got this constriction right here in the valley. And then from there all the way down, it really stays pretty confined. At Gold Hill, you've got a little bit of area, but you know that the rivers vary in size. There are a lot of bedrock. And transport continues right on through Gold Hill, continues on and on, down to the Applegate confluence before there's any real good areas for a lot of gravel to deposit. So you see that big floodplain comes to Gold Ray Dam, really comes down to a small point, and then continues out through there. So this is the river sediment that we're talking about. This is a 12-inch ruler. This picture was taken just last week out on the Gold Ray area, just upstream of Gold Ray. So this is the type of rocks and material that are in the reservoir area today. And so that's when I talk about sediment moving, this is the type of stuff that I'm talking about primarily. And so a lot of people have questions and don't necessarily understand how rivers move sediment, because we've seen this riffle has been here forever. The same riffle was there when I was a kid, and it's still there today. What do you mean the sediment is going to come in and move it and then move on? Because all the riffles would be gone, right, if that truly happened. Well, this is an example where we actually installed scour chains, and this here is a scour chain. This is on the Calapooya River up in the Willamette Valley. It's a gravel bed river, similar to the Rogue River as far as gravels, except for it's a little bit smaller river, obviously, than the Rogue River. This is a scour chain. It's got a duck-bill anchor. And what we do with these is we actually drive these down into the riffles so that we can see we have scour chain 1 and scour chain 2. This is a riffle on the gravel bed river. Drive them in the summer when the water's low and we can walk in the river. And then we leave. And then we come back the next summer after we've had some good floods and we know that sediment has moved, right, through the system. And then we find out what happened. And in this case, this is an example from 2008 and 2009. This is what happened. And this scour chain number 1 over there, this is what the chain looks like when it's embedded into the river. The elevation in 2008, when we set the scour chain, we set it right at the bed, right there. When we came back and surveyed it in and found it, it was 8 inches lower or below the gravel. So 8 inches of gravel had deposited on top of this chain that we had put into the riffle. But that only tells you half the story. The reason you put in these scour chains so that you can see how far the river moved during that big storm event. And what happens under big storm events is that these riffles start to mobilize, the sediment starts to move. And so this scour chain, when we found it, was actually laid over flat, and that's why we put chains in there, because then they can start to just lay over as they go deeper and deeper with the scour. In this case, it's scoured down, and when we found it, before it was standing straight up, was 18 inches. So the bed lowered 18 inches during the storm, and then when the storm started to recede, it filled in 18 plus 8, and actually filled in higher than what the original bed started out with. That's just a natural flux and a natural tendency of gravel bed rivers. They move a lot of sediment. They move a lot of big rocks and gravel. They naturally do that. And they will, in this case, scoured 18 inches. So if you were out there during a storm event, the bed would have been 18 inches lower. But then as the storm started to tail off, the material from upstream that was in suspension and moving down starts to fall out.